I've had more than 1,000 men cry and be vulnerable with me, many of them sharing their vulnerability for the first time, which is amazing because to this day, we are still teaching our boys and our men to cry less and to toughen up. Everyone from strangers to my family has tried to get me to get my son to cry less. And a couple years ago, I was walking down the hall with my son in his kindergarten, and a little boy had told him that if he said the number 10, he would die. And as a 6-year-old, he was terrified. So we're walking down the hall, and this woman looks at him and yells, "No tears," not knowing why he was crying. And I froze, luckily, because I think otherwise I might have pounced on her. And as she walked by, I managed to yell, "Tears are fine with me." And I looked at my son and I said, "It's okay to cry, sweetie. I know you're afraid." I don't think it's a coincidence that a few days later, this woman's son told me he got in trouble for saying mean things to kids 3 times that day. People who are hurting hurt others, especially those who aren't allowed to express their hurt. And too often, boys and men are told that their hurt is unmanly or unattractive. And I believe this has led us to a crisis where Mental Health America shows suicide on the rise since the year 2000. It's now the 7th leading cause of death for males. More than 4 times as many men die from suicide as women. And the NCHS reports that 1 in 10 men experience depression or anxiety. Now, not all men turn to suicide, and in the past 15 years, I've been a relationship and leadership coach for men. Men often come to me saying that things look really good on the outside, but parts of them are dying on the inside. And last year, in 1 month alone, men said to me things like, "I'm drinking alone at night and I don't want to tell my wife and scare her. The work, commute, the kids, it's all killing me. I got a promotion which should be amazing, but I don't know how to navigate it. I don't fit in anymore. I've never had a conversation about sex with my wife. We don't have a sex life and I don't know how. Being a father is amazing, but it's also really stressful to the point where I feel like I could break." So how do we help men share this vulnerability instead of hide it? Well, I've been working with this for the past 20 years since I was doing a master's degree in psychology, thinking I was going to work with women. And I was asked to facilitate a workshop for men, where men would come to get honest feedback from women with love and with care. And it was born out of an intentional community I was a part of, where we, as optimistic young adults, were exploring vulnerability with topics like attraction and rejection and frustration and jealousy, having conversations that most people would completely avoid. And 2 of the men were so impacted by this experience. They felt much more empowered, they felt able to connect. They wanted other men to have this experience as well. And so they created these workshops for men. And at the end of the first one, we're sitting around in a circle, about 20 men and women, and one of the men raises his hand and with tears streaming down his face, he says, "When I came here this weekend, I didn't know if I wanted to live anymore. I've been going through a painful divorce. I've been trying to raise my son. It's been really awful. But you saved me. You brought me back and you gave me hope." And when we asked him how, he said, "You didn't walk away, you didn't shame, you didn't attack my vulnerability. You welcomed my tears, my despair, even my rage." And since then, this man has gone on to raise his son and start new love relationships and build new businesses. And I've had the amazing honor to work with more than 1,000 men who felt safe to be vulnerable with me. What I've learned as a woman who welcomes men's vulnerability is that it doesn't promote weakness or deflation. It actually supports men to step into their vitality, their power, their empathy. It supports men to be kinder, more generous, and more integrity in their communities and in their families. Luckily, I'm seeing many organizations, beautiful organizations, where men are bringing men together to share their pain. The Mankind Project is an amazing one, the Young Men's Ultimate Weekend. They're coming together so they don't have to be alone. However, we're sending men back into a world where many of us are women. And so the question is, how do we help women welcome men's vulnerability, and how do we make it safer for men? As I was thinking about this, I thought back to the workshops I've led for women, where one of the things I taught, to the women's dismay, was that if we want men to actually be okay with our emotions, that there's often some education involved. And that it takes some practice, but eventually, simultaneously, you can feel your feelings, witness your feelings, and communicate about what you need in the midst of the feelings. And so it could go something like this. I've been having a really hard day, I feel frustrated, I feel angry. Would you be willing to sit with me for 5 minutes while I might cry, I might scream, I might talk, I'm definitely not going to attack you. But would you be willing to just listen and not try to change or fix me or my situation? It's simple, not easy, especially when you're in your most upset moments, but it's doable and you can learn it. So the question I started asking next was, would this same conversation work for men sharing their vulnerability with women? And what I realized from all of the sessions and the men coming to me, I saw that the cultural context of men's vulnerability being portrayed as weak or unmanly has to be addressed. Because men come to me saying that they're terrified of being undesired or being disrespected if they share their vulnerability with the women in their lives. And so it reminds me of an ask that I often see women having of men. Will you please not see me as crazy? Will you please not see me as too much when I'm emotional? There's an ask that men are bringing to me for women. And it is, will you please see beyond the cultural context that when I share vulnerability with you, I become weak? And will you please do what it takes to be able to continue to love and be attracted to me when I'm fully human with you? Now, vulnerable conversations can be messy and scary, and so there's a couple things I've learned that I want you to know that make vulnerable conversations go better, and that actually create connection instead of sending people running for the hills. The first one is that when you unravel the negative beliefs and stories you have about yourself, there's no longer anything to prove or defend. You don't have to prove that you're good enough or strong enough, because you already know you are. And so you can let go of the fear of being shamed or the apology for vulnerability, because you know that no one else's words or beliefs could actually touch the innate goodness in you. The second one is that when you learn to be comfortable with discomfort, or when you learn to actually be okay with vulnerability, you no longer do what I call the puke or the dump, which is often what sends people running. And so as you become comfortable with vulnerability, you can actually relax, and you start to rest into your sovereignty or integrity, and actually take on oftentimes a kind of kingly or a queenly quality, where you know that your vulnerability is only part of who you are, and so the people you're sharing with really get that as well. What I've learned in the past 15 years of working with men is that it's not enough to ask them to just express their vulnerability without addressing the cultural context that had them hold it back in the first place. And so that means that we as women and people of all genders have to really look at how we perpetuate these cultural norms. I used to be afraid of men's vulnerability. I was afraid that if a man was vulnerable with me, that meant he couldn't protect me or he couldn't take care of me. And so I would get chaotic and emotional and sadly block their vulnerability. Now, having dozens of men be vulnerable with me and then turn around and hold my pain when I needed it, I know that this is possible. And so my mission is to have every man's heart held in his most vulnerable places. And I invite it to become our mission to create the cultural changes necessary for men to thrive and for no man to suffer silently or alone. And I believe that we need women to be a part of this solution, and for our children and our boys to not become a statistic of depression or of suicide, we have to help them understand that vulnerability is not a weakness, that it's a strength. Thank you.